G'day, welcome back to Craft with Us Oz. This is Donna, and today I'm going to take you through several die cutting techniques that you can use when creating some of your beautiful greeting cards. These are the examples that we're going to have a look at, so let's get started. First technique that I'll be doing today is an inlay technique. So I've got a standard A6 card base here, then I've cut a mat that's about 5 millimeters on each edge, a little bit smaller, and then another designer paper that I've cut to go on top. You can see that what I've done is I've actually used wet glue as well as dry glue, the double-sided tape on this one, because I need to make sure that it's quite secure as I'm going to cut my die from both pieces. So I've run that through my die cutting machine, and now I'm just removing the die cut from the card. And this is the moment that I'm actually going to put on some more double-sided tape. So this is a little technique that I use here. I use the stamping block, the Perspex blocks, to help me rip off the tape at each corners. Then what I do is, you can see I've lifted it up in the diagonal corners, the tape just a little bit. So this is going to help me position it before I stick it down solidly. I'm also putting a little bit of wet glue around the heart because it's going to be important that that holds. So now I've got the opportunity to use the two corners that don't have the tape exposed to line them up, push them down, and then I can just remove the tape. This really helps me make sure that I can line these up perfectly. It's a die that I cut out off screen. It's out of the gold cardstock that I used as my base mat. I'm just popping glue on that and popping that in the hole that we've left there. So next I'm going to use the pieces out of the die. Now this is where we cut it out of the designer series paper with the cardstock at the beginning. And I'm taking all of those little pieces out of the die, and as I do, I'm putting them into the holes that I've got left there. You can see that I'm laying the die down, using my pick tool to push it out a little bit at a time. This really helps keep them all together. Now I'm just layering my sentiment. So I've cut out 3 of these out of black card. I'm sticking them all on top of one another. This is a lovely trick that Jennifer Maguire does that I just love the look of. It's beautiful. Adds a nice little bit of dimension to the card. Just going to stick that under my phone there to make sure that they dry nice and flat. A little bit more liquid glue on the back, and then I'm going to stick it on the front of my card. Once again, make sure it's flat. This is actually diamond glaze that I am using, and I pop that on the top and it gives it a beautiful, beautiful glass-like sheen. You can kind of see that in the video. So that's our inlay technique. The next one that we're going to do is I'm going to do a bunch of stacked dies. So we did see the stacked dies in the first card with the text, with the greeting. This time I'm actually doing it with the main feature of the card, which is the hearts. So once again, I've cut out several of each of the hearts. I think there's 3 of each one of these designs from my die set. And I'm just adding liquid glue on them, daubs of liquid glue, and then I'm going to carefully stick them on top of one another to make a nice dimensional embellishment, I guess is what it is, to pop on the top of my card. So I've done that with all 3. Now I'm going to use this Glad and Press. Now this Glad Press and Seal is what it's called. We don't actually have this in Australia, so I had a friend who went to America pick that up for me. It's an awesome product, and I use it quite a lot to keep things stable. So this particular die cut is quite fragile and it gets out of shape easily. So I've decided to pop it on a piece of Press and Seal, and that's going to keep it straight, and that's my base. It also gives me something to hold on to as I add the glue. So for those of you that don't know what Press and Seal is, it's a product that when you put pressure on it, it sticks, but it's quite low tack. So I use it for lots of different things in my craft room now. Once again, I saw this advertised by Jennifer Maguire and had to try it out. So I'll have to see if I can find somewhere in Australia that I can buy some more. So you can see how I'm using that with that fragile stamp. Once again, I'm just using liquid glue and I'm popping them on top of one another. And the Press and Seal just keeps it nice and flat. and in the correct places. All right. So I've done that now with 3 different hearts out of the set. So this is now my card base, and I'm just going to use some Distress Oxides to make a nice little background. So I'm starting with Picked Raspberry, which I have to admit is my favourite colour, but pink has always been my favourite colour. So I am just literally blending some of this onto my white cardstock. Now this is a piece that's cut 14.4 centimetres by 10 centimetres that will go on a standard A6 card base. So the A6 card base is actually an A5 piece of card folded in half. So now I'm going in with Carved Pumpkin. The Distress Oxides are just a delight to work with. I love them. I love the coverage of them. So they're my new favourite ink. You can see that that's blending on beautifully, and then I'm just going to go back and grab my Picked Raspberry, and I'm just going to go over where the Picked Raspberry and the Carved Pumpkin join to blend that in. Now I'm going to go with my last colour, which in this case is the Squeezed Lemonade. So you can see I'm turning it around because I'm right-handed. It's easier for me. And I've got a little piece of scrap card to put over the card that I'm working on so I don't put fingerprints on. I inevitably get ink all over me when I do these sorts of techniques, but no, it's fun. What good is craft without a little bit of mess? Once again, going back with my Carved Pumpkin, Squeezed Lemonade to make that blend line nice and smooth. Okay. So let's just move my mat away. So now I've decided where I'm going to place my hearts on top of this. I'm just using my tape again, my double-sided tape. Once again, all around the edges. You can use a tape runner if that's what you've got. So I'm just positioning the hearts onto my card front. You can see I'm using liquid glue here. I just find that it's more effective. This is just a little bottle that I purchased separately, but I actually use Aleene's Tacky Glue. This is such a fine point on it that I actually add a tiny bit of water to the tacky glue so when it can come through the little fine point. Okay, so now that these are all glued down onto my card front, these are fairly simple but very pretty cards. So now I'm just going to, I've got from another stamp set, and I've gone with a greeting that says heartfelt thanks. So I'm actually embossing this on a black piece of card, so I'm just using my anti-static mat. I've used my stamp positioner to make sure it's in the perfect spot. This, of course, is Versamark ink that I'm just using. I actually like to do a bit of a double stamp with it to make sure I get plenty of the embossing powder on it. So this is Ranger white embossing powder that I'm using. And I'm just going to double that up. Nice. Once again, it's important to make sure that your heat gun is nice and hot before you do this to avoid your cardstock warping. Now this particular greeting, I'm just wiping off the excess anti-static powder from that. That particular greeting has a die cut to match it, so I'm excited about that. I cut it out with that. What I'm using here is just some scraps of craft foam. So I'm using that to pop behind one edge of my greeting, because of course there's dimension with the heart, so it's important that we make sure, because I'm going to put the greeting partly over the heart, so I need to make sure that the end that's not going over that dimensional heart has the foam, the craft foam on it. You can just use double-sided tape. I just find that the double-sided tape is a bit too high in this particular instance, whereas the craft foam is a little bit flatter. If you don't have either, you could literally use card scraps and layer some card scraps behind that section of your greeting as well. It's just to make it nice and level with our hearts as such. So I'm just adding a little bit more liquid glue to the area that's going on the heart and then just popping my greeting on my card. Make sure that that dries flat by putting something heavy on it. Now I just wanted to show you here on this one, when I folded this particular card, it frayed a little bit at the edge. It was a different card that I was trying. I've gone back to using my Nina Solar White, but to get rid of, if that ever happens to you, you can just use a nail file, as I'm doing here, and just file off those little fluffy bits and it's as good as new. Whoop, needs a little bit more of a file, but it keeps it nice and clean without damaging the cardstock. So now I'm just going to position my card front. I think it needed a little bit more, so I'm just using, this is a clear Wink of Stella pen that I like to put every so often over the top. So I use this in my diamond glaze just to add those little finishing touches to some of my cards. You'll also notice that I like to actually work on my card front, just drying that off. I like to work on my card front and then add it to the base of the card. I just find it less cumbersome that way. So I can line that up, doing the same trick that I used before with just removing the tape on the corners, folding them out. I can position it and then remove the tape, and my top layer is perfectly positioned on my card base. So you can see a little bit of that Wink of Stella. So the next technique that we're doing is tone on tone with the die cuts. So once again, this is pink. Pink's my favourite. And I've cut out a whole pile of the hearts in this case. You could do this with any dies that you may have at home. I've got to say that it's really nice with numbers if you've got some large numbers. So I am just putting some wet glue once again on the back of these die cuts. This is just a single layer of die cut. I haven't layered the dies. And I am popping them on the same coloured card in the background. So once I've positioned all of those and they're stuck down, I'm just going to trim off the edges, as you can see here, to line them up. Of course, it's much easier to do it from the back than the front because you can see the edges a little bit easier from the back. So I'm trimming those off. There's a couple of little holes that I can use those pieces that I've cut off to fill. So you'll see that I position one of those. I think I'll position one of those. I might actually use another whole heart. So I'm just playing with those, and yes, I'm just laying those down to position them on where they can fit into the gap. It turns out that none of them were suitable, and I have used another whole heart, but I can use those little bits if I want to in another project. So I'm now placing a heart on a black background. So this gives you an inlay look without putting all of the pieces actually inside it. So you can see that I'm using that press and seal again there because I had a couple of little white bits from my heart. I think it's yellow actually, a very light yellow that I didn't like on the black. So I just put that down to catch up all of those little pieces of paper that were there. So now I'm just trimming around this heart. So I've glued this pale yellow heart to the black. And you can see I'm just trimming around the outside of this. It gives a lovely look and it really makes that heart stand out. Just going to stick that down onto my card front. Once again, use my phone to hold it down flat. I've created a little banner here, so I've used the pale yellow as a strip. Then I've put a strip of black on top of that, and then I've just embossed the sentiment, which just says "Just for you." So I didn't show you that technique again because we had a look at that a moment ago. Just removing the tape once again while I've positioned it and trimming off the edges to make it the same width as the card. Beautiful. So now I'm positioning that onto the card base. I used a black card base. Inside, I've added a couple of little bits of bling, and inside all I did was just put a piece of white cardstock to write the greeting on. So here I'm using another die. I'm just using one of these lovely border edge dies that will cut a wave. These are useful for so many things. And you can see there that I am placing the two pieces on a piece of acetate. So this will leave a gap in between. So I actually did that while I was resting it on my card base so I could see where I wanted it. So now I'm using my dies as a sort of bridge between the two pieces. Now, you don't actually have to stick the two larger pieces onto a piece of acetate if you didn't want to. You could just use the hearts or whatever dies you're using to join the two with having that totally open. I, however, chose to use the piece of acetate because these hearts, I beg your pardon, are a little bit fragile, and I didn't want them warping or, destroying the integrity of the card. So now I'm popping craft foam, which I've also cut using the same border die and trimmed it down a little bit. I'm using double-sided tape on these and popping the foam, the craft foam, on the back. Once again, I like to use craft foam in this case where I'm lifting it right up to give it a nice solid base, so when it goes through the mail it's not going to be destroyed. Okay, so that's placed down. This is the greeting that I'm going to use today, and it's made with love. So sometimes to get a little bit more out of your dies, you've got to be a tiny bit creative. So I didn't want the made in this case, I just wanted it to say with love. So I'm just putting that die on a smaller piece of black cardstock, and you can see that I've just got the with love cut out. Once again, I cut several of those, layered them, popped a little bit of bling on it, and we're all done. So here's a couple more examples using those same techniques. I hope you've enjoyed the video today. If you have, I'd love you to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. There will be a lot more coming now that I'm back into the swing of things. If you have any comments or feedback, or if there's anything in particular that you'd like to see, please let me know in the comments below. Once again, thank you so very much for joining me, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye for now.